For the reading of the gospel. To put this gospel into context, Jesus tells a parable about a son who ponders his father's love only after he has spurned it. The grace he receives is beyond his hopes. That same grace is a crisis for an older brother who believes it is his obedience that has earned his place in his father's home. The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in desolate living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while the son was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and said, 'What is going on?' He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then the son became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you've never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was following behind my family as we were wading through the dense crowds of Disney World, and I was following the familiar back of my father's head, when to my horror, I happened to look away and look back, and his head had vanished. Deep feelings of dread and embarrassment and fear crept into my little 8-year-old heart, and I was frozen in the midst of a sea of strangers. Thankfully, though, we had talked about this very scenario at the beginning of the day, and I knew that my parents wanted me to stand still and count to 100. And if I didn't see them by the time I got to 100, then I would need to look for a park employee to take me to the front of the park, and then I would wait for them there. So I started counting, and I got to 10, and I got to 20, and I got to 30. But then about halfway to 100, I saw my dad sprinting as fast as he could, dodging through strollers and children and people, making his way over to me and grabbing me into his arms. And then all was right with the world again. I wonder if some of you have similar stories to this. Maybe you were the one who was lost, or maybe you were the parent sprinting, running after your child. I heard a story yesterday about this and wonder if you all have those too. It's a part of the human experience. But I know you can imagine what it's like to have that parent, that father, running towards you, because that's what parents do. When their children are lost, literally or figuratively, they run, run, run to meet them where they are. Unless, of course, you're a first-century Palestinian patriarch, and then you are not expected to run. You don't run for anyone, not for your children, not for traditions, not for games. You don't run because those social norms would forbid you to do so. And plus, a Jewish man of the age in our story today would have been wearing long robes traditionally, so the action of running would have been rather difficult and awkward anyway. And if you were a first-century Palestinian patriarch, you definitely wouldn't run to meet your wasteful son who had asked for his inheritance early, essentially wishing that you were dead, and then went and squandered it at the equivalent of Las Vegas. This is not someone that you would run to. Your reputation would be at stake. In that culture and society, you would be expected to disown your son, to cast him out, to refuse to see him again, because he had brought dishonor not only upon you, but upon the entire household. It would be your duty in that day to defend your honor and the dignity that you had left. But in this story from Jesus, a strange and unexpected thing happens in this parable. The first-century patriarch smashes all social expectations, hikes up his skirts, and sprints like mad to meet his wayward son all the way down the road before his son even arrives to the driveway. The father meets and embraces and kisses his lost son. And when the son falls at his father's feet, appropriately confessing all the bad decisions that he's made, the father doesn't seem to want to hear it. He is too preoccupied making plans for how they are going to celebrate the fact that he has returned. For my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and has been found. This means then that the son's confession is completely separate from the actions of the father. Notice this in verse 20 of our reading. It says, while the son was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion and ran down the road to meet him. The son hadn't even spoken a word, and the father was rejoicing, ready to shower his son with love and grace and forgiveness. So this story has a lot less to do with the actions of the son and a lot more to do with the actions of the father. In fact, some have gone so far as to say that the name of this parable is really a misnomer. It places the focus on the wrong character of the story, because the story is not so much about a prodigal son as it is about a prodigal father. There's a commentator who explains this. He says, the word prodigal doesn't just refer to something negative. It's related to the term prodigious, which speaks of something that's extraordinary in size, amount, or extent. Both of these words, prodigious and prodigal, speak of being excessive. To be prodigal means to be extravagant, generous, and lavish. When used in the negative sense, prodigal describes someone who's wasteful or recklessly extravagant, spending everything they have on their own pleasure. However, when it's used in the positive sense, he says, it expresses the lavishness of someone who goes far beyond what you would expect them to bless others with. This parable, then, he says, seems to be more about a prodigal father than an impudent, selfish son. It's not about a son who willingly wastes his inheritance, but about a father who gives lavishly to those that he loves." Unquote. So this father goes far beyond what anyone would expect him to bless others with, especially those who have wronged him. And it's important to note that the father doesn't just do this with his younger son, he does this with the elder son as well. A son who is stewing in anger and jealousy and resentment, so much so that he refuses to go to the party. And even so, the father breaks social norms again and symbolically runs towards him as well. In those days, hosts, our first-century Palestinian patriarchs, were expected to stay with guests at all times. And so the fact that he left the party again was a way of him breaking social norms to say there's something greater at stake here. It was a breach of social etiquette for him to plead with his son. Sons were supposed to plead with their fathers, not the other way around. But the point here, again and again, is that the father will stop at nothing to meet his sons exactly where they are. There's a similar story in Jewish literature about a king whose son went away from his father for 100 days. The son's friends encouraged him to return to his father, but the son said, "I cannot." And so the king sent word to his son and said to the son, "Return as far as you can, and I will come the rest of the way to you." Return as far as you can, and I will come the rest of the way to you. This is what the prodigal father does today in Jesus' parable. He chooses over and over again to absorb the shame heaped on him by both of his sons, and he does so with extravagant love, forgiveness, generosity, grace, and mercy. Return as far as you can, and I will not only come the rest of the way to you, I will run to wherever you are. This is the message that Christ speaks to us as well. Paul even reminds us of this in his letter to the Romans, that there is nothing in all of creation that can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Nothing we do, nothing we say, nothing we bring, because it doesn't depend on us, it depends on God. And God is already running to meet us wherever we are. So again, this parable is not about the younger son, it's not about the older son, it's not about you or me or anyone else. This parable is about the Father. It's about God's prodigal, extravagant, borderline excessive grace, mercy, and forgiveness for all people and all of creation. Sometimes we may not want to believe that we are worthy of that kind of love, and we aren't. But God keeps on giving it because that's who God is. And it's God's dream that we then respond to this by extending that same extravagant, prodigal love and mercy to others. It's a challenging task. It's exhausting, never-ending, perspective-altering, radically humbling work. But this is the work that we, with the help of Christ, are called to do in our communities, in our world, and in the institutions that we are a part of. For God looks at us with love, and God says, "All of mine is yours. Rejoice and celebrate," and then run down the road to greet others with this good news too. Amen.